What if every villain inside Arkham isn't just dangerous, but part of something much bigger? Behind every cell door lies a story shaped by Gotham itself. Fear, chaos, control, and the fragile line between them. From masterminds who plan in silence to forces of destruction that cannot be contained, each Arkham boss represents a different side of the same broken system. But when you step back and look at them all together, a pattern begins to form, one that connects every rise, every fall, and every return. In this deep dive, we uncover not just who they are, but why they exist, and the unsettling truth that Arkham may not be holding them, but keeping the cycle alive. The gates of Arkham. At the edge of Gotham City, where the lights begin to thin and the noise of the streets grows quieter, there stands a place that feels separate from everything around it. A place that is not just made of stone and steel, but of stories, of memories, of something heavier that cannot be easily seen. And this place is Arkham Asylum, a structure built with the purpose of holding those who could not be held anywhere else, those whose actions and minds did not fit within the usual systems of order. And yet, from the very beginning, there has always been a question that lingers quietly around it, a question about whether it truly contains what it was meant to contain, or whether it simply gathers it in one place. Arkham does not feel like a normal building, because even before stepping inside, there is a sense that it carries something more than its walls, something that has built up over time, layer by layer. As each new patient is brought in, as each story becomes part of its history, and as each attempt to restore order meets the same challenge again and again, it stands as a symbol of Gotham's effort to manage what it cannot fully understand, to create a boundary between the city and the forces that threaten it. But that boundary has never been as strong as it appears. Gotham itself is not a city that functions in a simple way, because while it has rules, systems, and structures meant to guide it, those systems are often weakened by corruption, by imbalance, by forces that operate beneath the surface. And over time, this has created a situation where the city is constantly trying to repair itself while also being pulled apart. In this environment, Arkham becomes more than just a place for treatment or containment. It becomes part of the system that reflects the city's struggles, a place where the results of those struggles are brought together, where the consequences of a broken system are gathered and studied. Within Arkham, the individuals who are placed there are often seen as separate from the rest of the city, as if they exist outside of it, as if they are something entirely different. But when looked at more closely, there is a connection that cannot be ignored, because many of those who end up within its walls are shaped by the same conditions that shape Gotham itself. They are not created in isolation, but formed within the city's environment, influenced by its pressures, its failures, its moments of instability. And in this way, they can be seen not only as individuals, but as reflections of the larger system. Each villain carries something that connects back to Gotham, something that reveals a part of the city's nature, whether it is the result of broken justice, unchecked ambition, loss, fear, or the collapse of personal stability under pressure. Their actions may seem extreme, their behavior difficult to understand, but when viewed as part of a larger pattern, they begin to show something about the environment that allowed them to become what they are. In this sense, Arkham is not just holding individuals, but holding pieces of Gotham itself, gathered into one place where they can be seen more clearly. This idea becomes even more complex when considering how Arkham functions, because it is meant to be a place of treatment, a place where minds can be studied, where behavior can be understood, where change can be guided, but it is also a place of confinement, where control is enforced, where movement is restricted, where freedom is removed. These two purposes do not always align easily, and this creates tension within the institution itself, a tension between healing and control, between understanding and containment. Over time, this tension shapes how Arkham is experienced, both by those inside it and those who interact with it from the outside. For some, it is a place of hope, a place where change might be possible, where even the most difficult cases could find some form of resolution, but for others, it becomes something else, something closer to a holding space where problems are delayed rather than solved, where individuals are kept away from the city, but not fully removed from its ongoing story. This is where Arkham begins to feel less like a solution and more like a stage, a place where events do not simply stop, but continue in a different form, where interactions shift from the streets to the corridors, from open spaces to controlled environments, but where the underlying dynamics remain. The conflicts that exist outside do not disappear when someone enters Arkham, but instead transform, becoming more focused, more psychological, more centered on thought and perception, rather than physical movement alone. Within its walls, conversations take on a different weight, because they are not only about what has happened, but about why it happened, about what it means, about how it connects to larger ideas. The environment encourages observation, analysis, reflection, but it also creates opportunities for manipulation, for influence, for the kind of interactions that can shape future actions in subtle ways. It becomes a place where battles are fought not only with strength or speed, but with words, with ideas, with the ability to challenge another person's understanding of themselves. For Batman, Arkham represents a different kind of challenge, because while he operates in the open spaces of Gotham, responding to immediate threats, within Arkham, the focus shifts, becoming less about action and more about understanding, about recognizing patterns, about seeing beyond the surface. It is a place where the usual methods are not always enough, where the struggle becomes more internal, more connected to the minds of those within it. At the same time, Arkham is never fully separate from Gotham, because what happens inside it often finds its way back out, whether through escape, through influence, or through the continued presence of the ideas that exist within its walls. This creates a cycle where the line between inside and outside becomes less clear, where the city and the asylum influence each other in ways that continue over time. The gates of Arkham, in this sense, do not simply mark a boundary between safety and danger, but a transition between different forms of the same struggle, between external conflict and internal conflict, between visible action and hidden thought. Crossing those gates does not end the story, but shifts it into another space, another layer, another part of the ongoing narrative. And so, Arkham stands not only as a place within Gotham, but as a reflection of it, a concentrated version of the forces that shape the city, a space where the broken parts are gathered, where the patterns become more visible, where the struggle between order and chaos continues in a different form. It is not just a building, but a symbol of the city's attempt to understand itself, to manage what it cannot fully control, to create meaning within a system that is always shifting. In the quiet moments, when the halls are still and the noise has faded, there is a sense that the stories within Arkham do not end, but rest, waiting, holding their place within the larger pattern, ready to continue when the time comes. The gates remain closed, but never completely sealed, and beyond them, the connection between the asylum and the city remains, a reminder that what is held inside is never entirely separate from what exists outside, and that the story of Gotham continues, both within those walls and beyond them, in ways that are always changing, always moving, always unfolding. The Dark Knight's burden. There is a quiet weight that follows Batman through Gotham City, a presence that cannot be seen in the same way as the shadows he moves within, but can be felt in the way he watches, in the way he waits, in the way he chooses each action with care, as if every moment carries meaning beyond itself. And this weight is not only the responsibility of protecting others, but the understanding that in a city like Gotham, protection is never simple, never complete, and never truly finished. He does not move through the city as someone separate from it, but as someone deeply connected to it, shaped by its past, by its losses, by its ongoing struggle to hold itself together. Batman is often seen as a protector, a figure who steps in when danger appears, who stands between harm and those who might be affected by it. And this role is clear in many ways, because his actions are direct. focused on stopping threats, preventing damage, restoring a sense of order, even if only for a moment. But there is more to his role than this, because he is also an observer, someone who watches the city closely, who studies patterns, who tries to understand not only what is happening, but why it is happening, how different events connect, how small changes can lead to larger outcomes. This role as an observer requires patience, because Gotham does not reveal its truths easily, and understanding it takes time, attention, and a willingness to look beyond what is immediately visible. Batman gathers information, not only through tools and technology, but through experience, through repeated encounters, through the gradual building of knowledge that allows him to respond more effectively over time. This process is ongoing, never complete, because the city itself continues to change, to evolve, to present new challenges that must be understood. At the same time, he is not only observing or protecting, but participating, because he is part of the very system he is trying to influence, part of the cycle that continues within Gotham. His actions shape events, influence outcomes, create reactions, and in this way, he is not outside the story, but deeply within it, affecting and being affected by what happens around him. This participation adds another layer to his burden, because it means that he is not only responding to the city, but contributing to its ongoing pattern. His connection to the villains he faces becomes more clear when viewed through this perspective, because they are not simply opponents to be defeated, but figures who reflect different aspects of the same environment, different responses to the same pressures, different outcomes shaped by similar conditions. Each one carries a part of Gotham's story, a part of its broken system, a part of its struggle, and in facing them, Batman is also facing the consequences of the city itself. This connection is not always direct or simple, but it exists in the shared space they occupy, in the way their stories intersect, in the way their actions influence each other. Some villains represent the failure of justice, others the collapse of identity, others the effect of fear or loss, and in each case, there is a link back to the environment that shaped them. Batman, who also comes from that environment, who has also been shaped by loss and by the need to respond to it, stands in contrast to them, but not completely separate from them. This creates a sense of reflection, where each encounter becomes more than just a conflict, becoming instead a moment where different paths are revealed, where different choices are seen, where the difference between what one person becomes and what another becomes is highlighted. Batman's path is one of control, of discipline, of holding onto a set of rules that guide his actions, while others may have chosen different paths, leading to different outcomes, and this contrast adds depth to each interaction. The burden of this connection is not light, because it carries with it the understanding that the line between him and those he faces is not as wide as it might seem, that the same city, the same events, the same pressures could have led to different results under different conditions. This awareness does not weaken his resolve, but it adds weight to it, making each decision more significant, each action more carefully considered. In a city that never fully heals, this burden becomes even more complex, because there is no clear point where the work is done, no moment where the system is fully restored, no time when the need for protection disappears. Gotham continues to experience cycles of conflict, moments of disruption followed by attempts at recovery, patterns that repeat in different forms. And within this ongoing process, Batman remains active, always responding, always adapting, always carrying the responsibility forward. This lack of resolution means that his role is not temporary, but continuous, something that extends over time without a clear endpoint. The idea of success becomes different in this context, because it is not measured by final outcomes, but by ongoing effort, by the ability to maintain balance, to reduce harm, to respond effectively even when the larger system remains unstable. This creates a kind of steady pressure, a sense that there is always more to be done, always another challenge ahead. There are moments when the weight of this responsibility becomes more visible, when the impact of what he carries is felt more strongly, when the connection between his actions and the larger system becomes clearer. These moments may come after loss, after difficult decisions, after events that do not have easy solutions, and in those times, the burden is not only physical, but emotional, connected to the understanding of what is at stake. And yet, despite this weight, he continues, not because the path is easy, but because it is chosen, because the belief in the importance of his role remains strong, because the need to protect, to observe, to participate in shaping the city remains present. This choice is part of what defines him, part of what allows him to carry the burden without being overcome by it. In the quiet spaces between action, when the city slows and the immediate threats are not as visible, there is still movement, still thought, still preparation, because the work does not stop, even when the pace changes. The burden remains, steady and constant, shaping how he moves, how he thinks, how he continues. Gotham, in turn, continues to reflect this presence, shaped in part by the efforts to protect it, by the attempts to restore order, by the ongoing interaction between those who seek to maintain balance and those who disrupt it. The city does not heal completely, but it does not collapse entirely either, existing in a state of tension that continues over time. And within this tension, Batman remains, not as a solution that ends the problem, but as a force that responds to it, that works within it, that carries the burden of a city that cannot fully heal, but can still be protected, moment by moment, action by action, choice by choice. The clown who broke the rules, Joker. In a place like Arkham, where walls are meant to hold and routines are meant to steady the mind, there is one presence that seems to move through those limits, as if they were only suggestions. And that presence is the Joker, not simply as an inmate among many, but as something that shifts the air itself, changing how people think, how they react, how events begin and unfold, until it feels as if the structure around him is no longer fully in control. He does not arrive as a quiet problem to be managed, but as a force that unsettles the idea of management, because wherever he is placed, the rules that usually guide behavior begin to bend, and the patterns that once felt reliable start to lose their shape. In Arkham, systems are designed to observe, to contain, to create distance between thought and action. But the Joker has a way of turning observation into attention, and attention into influence. Because he does not simply sit within the system, he interacts with it, speaks into it, and often finds ways to use it as part of what he is doing. Conversations that might seem simple become layered with suggestion. Small actions carry unexpected meaning, and even moments of stillness begin to feel like part of a larger plan that is not fully visible from the outside. This is why he often becomes the central force of chaos, not only because of what he does directly, but because of how his presence connects different events, pulling them into a pattern that may not be clear at first, but becomes more visible over time. When something unusual happens within Arkham, when routines break, when tension rises in ways that cannot be easily explained, there is often a sense that he is connected to it, even if he is not at the center of it in a visible way. It is as if his influence spreads through the environment, not always through direct action, but through the reactions he creates in others. The Joker understands people in a way that does not rely on empathy in the usual sense, but on observation, on recognizing how individuals respond under pressure, how they react when their expectations are challenged, and he uses this understanding to shape events. He does not need to control every detail, because he sets things in motion and allows others to respond, knowing that their responses will create new situations that he can then influence again. This creates a chain of events that feels both planned and unpredictable, because while there is direction, there is also room for change, for variation, for outcomes that are not fully fixed. Within Arkham, this approach becomes even more effective, because the environment itself is already filled with tension, with individuals who are struggling, with systems that are not always stable, and the Joker moves through this space like someone who knows how to find the points where pressure can be applied, He may speak to someone at just the right moment, introduce an idea that grows over time, or create a situation that leads to a reaction, and in doing so, he shapes events without always appearing to be the one directly responsible. This kind of manipulation is not always loud or immediate, but often quiet and gradual, building over time, allowing small changes to grow into larger ones, allowing the system to shift from within rather than being broken from the outside. It is a method that relies on understanding rather than force, on timing rather than speed, and this makes it more difficult to detect and to stop because it does not always follow a clear path. At the center of this approach is his philosophy of unpredictability, the belief that life does not need to follow a fixed pattern, that order is not as stable as people believe, and that meaning can change depending on how events are experienced. This belief is not something he simply speaks about, but something he demonstrates through his actions, through the way he creates situations that do not have clear outcomes, through the way he removes the sense of certainty that people depend on. He does not act in ways that are completely random because there is intention behind what he does, but that intention does not lead to a single, predictable result, and this creates a space where anything can happen, where the usual expectations do not apply, where the line between control and chaos becomes difficult to define. This is what makes his presence so unsettling, because it challenges the idea that events can be understood in a simple way, that actions lead to clear results, that systems can always maintain order. Madness, in this context, is not only about losing control, but about seeing the world differently, about rejecting the structures that others rely on, about embracing the idea that meaning is not fixed, that it can shift, that it can be reshaped. The Joker moves within this perspective, not as someone who has lost all awareness, but as someone who has chosen to operate outside of the usual boundaries, who has accepted a different way of understanding reality. For those within Arkham, this creates a constant challenge, because they must try to maintain structure in an environment where one presence is constantly testing that structure, pushing against it, finding its limits. Guards, doctors, and patients all become part of this dynamic, whether they choose to or not, because his influence reaches into their interactions, into their decisions, into the way they respond to what is happening around them. For Batman, this presents a different kind of conflict, because it is not only about stopping physical actions, but about understanding the patterns behind them, about recognizing the connections that are not immediately visible, about responding to something that does not follow a clear path. It requires a different kind of thinking, a willingness to adapt, to consider possibilities that do not fit within the usual framework. The Joker's role as a central force of chaos is not based on strength in the traditional sense, but on influence, on the ability to change how others think and act, on the ability to disrupt systems from within. He does not need to control everything directly, because he creates conditions where control becomes uncertain, where the system itself begins to work in ways that are not intended. Over time, this makes him more than just another figure within Arkham, because he becomes a point around which events begin to form, a presence that shapes the environment, that changes the way the institution functions, that turns a place meant for containment into a space where unpredictability can grow. The walls remain, the routines continue, but beneath that, something shifts, something moves, something that cannot be fully held. And so, within Arkham, the Joker does not simply exist, but acts as a force that reveals the limits of the system, that shows how easily structure can be challenged, that demonstrates how unpredictability can spread through even the most controlled environments. His actions, his words, his presence all contribute to this, creating a pattern that continues, a movement that does not settle, a reminder that chaos, once introduced, does not simply disappear, but becomes part of the ongoing story, shaping it in ways that are not always visible but always present. The fallen district attorney, Two-Face. Before the scars, before the coin, before the split that would come to define him, Harvey Dent stood in Gotham as something rare, a figure who believed that the law could still work in a city that often made that belief feel almost impossible. And in those earlier days, he was not only a district attorney, but a symbol of balance, of fairness, of the idea that justice could be guided by reason rather than fear. He worked within the system, trusting that if it was used correctly, if it was held to its purpose, it could protect the city from falling further into darkness. And for a time, that belief gave him strength, allowing him to stand against forces that seemed much larger than himself. But Gotham does not always allow such belief to remain unchanged, because the same system that promises order can also reveal its weaknesses. And for someone like Harvey Dent, who placed so much trust in that system, those weaknesses did not remain distant or abstract, but became personal, became part of his daily experience, part of the challenges he faced as he tried to bring criminals to justice in a city where power often found ways to avoid consequence. Each case, each failure, each moment where the system did not hold as it should, began to place pressure on his belief, not all at once, but gradually, like small cracks forming beneath a surface that still appears solid. There are accounts of how this pressure built over time, how the struggle between what the system was meant to be and what it often became began to shape his thinking, how the idea of fairness started to feel more complicated, more uncertain, as if the balance he believed in was not as stable as he once thought. In these moments, Harvey Dent was still the same person on the outside, still speaking of justice, still working within the law, but beneath that, there was movement, a shift in how he understood the world, a growing awareness that the clear lines he relied on might not always hold. The event that changed everything is often described as sudden, but its impact carries the weight of everything that came before it, because when the moment arrives, when the acid is thrown, when the physical transformation begins, it does not simply alter his appearance, but breaks the connection between who he was and who he is about to become. The damage to his face becomes a visible symbol of something deeper, something internal that is also splitting, something that can no longer hold together in the same way. When he looks at himself after that moment, when he sees the reflection that no longer matches the person he once recognized, there is a shift that takes place, not only in how he sees himself, but in how he understands the idea of identity. The balance that once defined him is no longer whole, and in its place, something new begins to form, something that does not try to return to what was, but instead accepts the split, the division, as part of what he has become. This is where the idea of duality becomes central, because Harvey Dent does not disappear completely, but exists alongside another aspect, another way of thinking that approaches the world differently, that does not rely on the same sense of control or fairness, but instead turns to something else, something that feels more certain in its own way, even if it is built on unpredictability. This is where Two-Face begins to emerge, not as a separate person in a simple sense, but as a reflection of the division within him, a manifestation of the conflict that now defines his existence. The coin becomes the focus of this new approach, a small object that carries a meaning far beyond its size, because it represents the idea of chance, of decision without bias, of outcome without control. For Harvey Dent, who once believed in fairness guided by law and reason, the coin becomes a different kind of fairness, one that removes personal choice, one that places the result in the hands of chance rather than judgment. In this way, it becomes both a tool and a symbol, something that allows him to act without the same internal conflict, because the decision is no longer his alone. This reliance on the coin reflects a deeper shift in how he understands fairness, because where he once believed in structured justice, he now turns to randomness as a form of balance, as if the unpredictability of the coin can replace the instability of the system he once trusted. It is a way of simplifying decisions, of reducing complex situations to a single moment, a single flip, where the outcome is determined without debate or doubt. At the same time, the coin also reflects the fractured nature of his morality, because it divides actions into two sides, just as his identity has been divided. creating a world where choices are no longer guided by a single, consistent set of values, but by a split perspective that shifts depending on the outcome. This makes his actions difficult to predict, because they do not follow a clear path, but move according to the result of the coin, creating a pattern that is both structured and unpredictable at the same time. For those who encounter him, this creates a unique kind of tension, because they are not only facing a threat, but facing a system of decision that does not respond to reason in the usual way. That cannot be influenced through argument or logic, because the outcome is already placed in the hands of chance. This removes a level of control from the situation, making it more uncertain, more difficult to navigate. The transformation from Harvey Dent to Two-Face is not simply a change in identity, but a shift in how the world is experienced, how decisions are made, how fairness is understood. It shows how a belief, when broken, can lead to something very different. How the loss of one system can lead to the creation of another, even if that new system is based on principles that seem opposite to the original. In Gotham, this transformation carries a deeper meaning because it reflects the city's own struggle with balance, with fairness, with the tension between order and chaos. Harvey Dent was once a symbol of what the city could be, a representation of hope within a broken system, and his fall into Two-Face becomes a reflection of how that hope can be damaged, how the same system that creates stability can also contribute to its collapse. For Batman, this story holds a particular weight, because Harvey Dent was not only a figure within the system, but someone he believed in, someone he saw as a partner in the effort to bring order to Gotham. The transformation into Two-Face becomes more than just the rise of another villain, but a reminder of how fragile that effort can be, how easily things can change, how even those who stand for order can be pulled into chaos under the right conditions. And so, Two-Face stands as both a person and a symbol, a reflection of division, of broken balance, of the tension between two sides that cannot fully come together again. His actions, guided by the coin, continue to show this division, creating moments where chance replaces choice, where fairness is defined not by reason, but by outcome, where morality is split rather than unified. In the end, the story of the fallen district attorney is not only about transformation, but about what happens when belief is broken, when balance is lost, when identity becomes divided. It is a story that reflects the larger patterns of Gotham, the way the city shapes those within it, the way it challenges even the strongest ideals, and the way those challenges can lead to outcomes that are not always expected. And within that story, the coin continues to turn, a small, simple motion that carries with it the weight of everything that has been lost, everything that has changed, and everything that remains divided, reminding us that in a world where balance is fragile, even the smallest object can become a symbol of something much larger. The question without an answer, the Riddler. In a city where many threats arrive with force and noise, there is one figure whose presence is quieter at first, more measured, more controlled, and yet no less dangerous. Because instead of relying on strength or fear alone, he uses the mind as his primary tool, shaping situations through thought, through patterns, through questions that do not always have simple answers. And this figure is Edward Nygma, known to Gotham as the Riddler, a man whose greatest need is not only to act, but to be seen, to be understood, and above all, to be recognized. Edward Nygma does not operate in the same way as many others within Gotham, because his actions are not driven only by immediate goals such as power or destruction, but by a deeper desire to prove something, to show that his intellect places him above others, that his ability to think, to create puzzles, to design challenges, sets him apart in a way that demands attention. This need for recognition is not a small part of who he is, but a central force, something that shapes every decision, every plan, every interaction he creates. From early on, there are signs of this need, moments where he seeks validation, where he wants others to see what he sees, to appreciate the patterns he creates, to acknowledge the effort and thought behind his work. When this recognition is not given, When it is ignored or dismissed, it does not simply fade, but grows stronger, turning into frustration, into a desire to force attention, to create situations where his intellect cannot be overlooked. This is where his approach begins to take shape, because instead of acting directly, he builds challenges, constructs puzzles, creates riddles that must be solved in order to understand what is happening. These riddles are not only tools, but expressions, ways of communicating his thoughts, ways of presenting his intelligence in a form that others must engage with. Each riddle becomes a statement, a demonstration, a test that demands response. In this way, riddles serve two purposes at once, because they are both challenges and compulsions, something he offers to others as a test of their ability, but also something he feels driven to create, as if he cannot act without including them, as if the process of forming a puzzle is as important as the outcome itself. This creates a pattern where every action is accompanied by a question, every plan includes a layer that must be understood, and every moment carries the expectation of being solved. This need to include riddles in everything he does reflects his desire for control, because through these puzzles, he shapes how others interact with his actions, guiding their thoughts, directing their attention, controlling the flow of information. By deciding what is revealed and what is hidden, by choosing how a riddle is structured, he places himself in a position where he can influence the outcome, even if he does not directly control every step. At the same time, this reliance on riddles introduces a kind of limitation, because it binds his actions to a structure that can be followed, even if it is complex. And this is where his connection to Batman becomes most clear, because Batman is one of the few who can engage with these puzzles, who can follow the patterns, who can understand the logic behind them. This creates a unique kind of interaction, one that is less about physical confrontation and more about intellectual exchange. Their encounters often feel like conversations carried out through action, where each move is a response to the last, where each clue leads to another, where the process of solving becomes the central focus. Batman does not simply try to stop the Riddler, but must also understand him, must follow his thinking, must enter the structure of the puzzle in order to reach its end. This creates a dynamic that is different from many other conflicts, because it requires patience, attention, and the ability to see beyond the surface. For the Riddler, this interaction is exactly what he seeks, because it provides the recognition he desires, not in the form of simple attention, but in the form of engagement, of someone taking his puzzles seriously, of someone who can match his thinking, who can respond in a way that validates the effort he has put into his creations. This makes Batman not only an opponent, but an audience, someone whose understanding gives meaning to the riddles themselves. This relationship, however, is not balanced, because while Batman engages with the puzzles as a means to an end, as a way to stop harm and restore order, the Riddler engages with it as an end in itself, as the main purpose of his actions. And this difference creates tension, because their goals do not fully align, even as their methods intersect. Batman seeks resolution, while the Riddler seeks recognition, and within this difference, their encounters continue. The puzzles themselves vary in complexity, some simple, others layered and intricate, but all carrying the same underlying structure, a question that must be answered, a path that must be followed, a solution that reveals something about the person solving it. In this way, each riddle becomes more than just a challenge, but a test of perception, of logic, of attention to detail, requiring the solver to think in a way that mirrors the creator. There is also a sense of performance in this, though it is quieter than that of others, because the Riddler presents his puzzles in ways that draw attention, that create anticipation, that build tension as each clue is revealed. The environment becomes part of the puzzle, the timing becomes part of the experience, and the act of solving becomes part of the story itself. In Gotham, where chaos often appears sudden and uncontrolled, the Riddler introduces a different kind of disruption, one that is structured, one that follows patterns, one that invites engagement even as it creates danger. This makes his presence unique, because it challenges not only physical ability, but mental focus, requiring those who face him to think as well as act. At the same time, his need for recognition means that his actions are often designed to be seen, to be noticed, to be understood, and this creates opportunities for intervention, for response, for the kind of engagement that Batman provides. Without that audience, without that interaction, the riddles lose some of their purpose, and this creates a dependency that shapes how he operates. Over time, this pattern becomes part of his identity, defining how he moves through Gotham, how he interacts with others, how he expresses himself. The question without an answer becomes not just a description of his puzzles, but a reflection of his own state, a person driven by the need to be understood, yet never fully satisfied, always seeking the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove himself. In the end, the Riddler's story is not only about intelligence, but about the need for recognition, about the desire to be seen and acknowledged, about the way that need can shape actions in powerful ways. His riddles remain, echoing through the city, each one carrying a piece of his mind, each one inviting response, each one continuing the cycle of question and answer that defines his presence. And as long as there are questions to ask, as long as there are minds to challenge, as long as there is someone willing to solve, the pattern continues, the puzzles remain, and the search for recognition goes on, unanswered in a final sense, but always moving, always evolving, always waiting for the next response. Fear as a weapon, Scarecrow. In Gotham City, fear is not something new, because it has always existed in quiet forms and loud ones, in dark alleys and empty streets, in the minds of those who walk through the night, and in the systems that struggle to keep order. But there is one figure who does not simply react to fear or cause it as a side effect of his actions, but studies it, shapes it, and uses it with purpose, turning it into something precise and controlled. And that figure is Dr. Jonathan Crane, known as Scarecrow, a man who does not see fear as something to avoid, but as something to understand, something to explore, something to use. Before he became Scarecrow, Jonathan Crane was a man of study, someone who looked at the mind not just as a place of thought, but as a system that could be examined, influenced, and, in some ways, controlled. His focus was on fear, on how it works, on how it appears, on how it affects behavior, and over time, this focus grew into something deeper, something that moved beyond simple academic interest and into personal obsession. He did not just want to know what fear was, but how it could be created, how it could be shaped, how it could be made stronger or weaker depending on the situation. There are stories of his early work, of experiments and observations that aim to map out the structure of fear, to understand what triggers it, what increases it, what causes it to fade. And in those early stages, there was still a connection to science, as it is usually understood, a connection to study and method. But as time passed, that connection began to shift, becoming less about careful observation and more about direct experience, about creating situations where fear could be seen in its most intense form. This shift marked the beginning of a transformation, not as sudden as others in Gotham, but gradual, built over time, as his focus narrowed, as his interest became more specific, more driven, more centered on the idea that fear was not just something to be understood, but something to be used. He began to see fear not as a problem, but as a tool, a way to influence others, a way to change how they see the world, how they react, how they make decisions. The use of toxin becomes central to this approach, because it allows him to move beyond words and into direct manipulation of perception, altering how people experience reality, shaping what they see, what they feel, what they believe is happening around them. This toxin does not create something entirely new, but brings existing fears to the surface, amplifying them, making them more vivid, more immediate, more difficult to ignore. When someone is exposed to this toxin, their surroundings begin to change, not in a physical sense, but in how they are perceived, as familiar spaces become distorted, as ordinary objects take on new meanings, as shadows grow deeper and more threatening. The line between what is real and what is imagined begins to blur, creating a state where the mind struggles to separate the two, where fear becomes the dominant experience. This effect is not random, but shaped by the individual, by their own fears, their own memories, their own thoughts. And this makes the toxin especially powerful because it does not impose a single image or idea, but reveals what is already present, what is already hidden within the mind. In this way, the fear becomes personal, specific, tailored to each person, making it more effective and more difficult to resist. For Scarecrow, this is not only a method, but a form of expression, a way of exploring the mind, a way of testing the limits of perception, a way of demonstrating his understanding of fear as both a science and a philosophy. He does not see fear as something that should be removed, but as something that reveals truth, as something that strips away the surface and exposes what lies beneath. This belief shapes how he interacts with others, because he does not simply aim to cause fear, but to study it, to observe how people react, how they respond when their perception is altered, when their sense of reality is challenged. He places individuals in situations where they must confront their fears directly, where they must face what they would normally avoid, and in doing so, he gathers information not only about them, but about the nature of fear itself. In Gotham, where fear is already part of the environment, his actions add another layer because they intensify what is already present, turning quiet fears into overwhelming experiences, turning uncertainty into something more immediate. This creates a shift in how fear is experienced, moving it from something that exists in the background to something that takes center stage, something that cannot be ignored. For Batman, this creates a unique kind of challenge, because while he is used to facing physical threats, the influence of fear requires a different kind of response, one that involves control of the mind, the ability to remain focused even when perception is altered, the ability to recognize what is real and what is not. This is not a simple task, because the toxin works on the mind itself, targeting the same systems that guide thought and decision. Their encounters often take place in environments that reflect this tension, spaces that feel unstable, where the usual sense of direction is lost, where time and distance become unclear, where the mind must work harder to maintain a sense of control. In these moments, the struggle is not only against an external force, but against the internal response to fear, the instinct to react, to retreat, to lose focus. Scarecrow's view of fear as both science and philosophy becomes clear in these interactions, because he does not separate the two, but sees them as connected, as different ways of understanding the same phenomenon. The science provides the method, the means to create and control fear, while the philosophy provides the meaning, the reason behind its use, the belief that fear reveals something important about human nature. This belief leads him to push further, to explore deeper levels of fear, to create more intense experiences, to test the limits of what the mind can handle, and in doing so, he becomes more than just a figure who uses fear, but a figure who embodies it, who represents the idea that fear is not only a reaction, but a fundamental part of existence. In the larger context of Gotham, his presence highlights the role of fear within the city, the way it influences behavior, the way it shapes decisions, the way it exists alongside other forces such as power, control, and chaos. It shows that fear is not separate from these forces, but connected to them, part of the same system, influencing and being influenced in return. At the same time, his actions raise questions about the limits of control, about how much influence one person can have over another's perception, about the ethics of using fear as a tool, about the consequences of pushing the mind beyond its usual boundaries. These questions do not have simple answers, but they add depth to the story, creating a space for reflection. In the end, Scarecrow stands as a figure who has taken a common human experience and turned it into something more focused, more intense, more deliberate, using fear not only as a weapon, but as a way of understanding the world. His work, his actions, his beliefs, all point toward a single idea: that fear is not something to be ignored, but something to be faced, something that reveals, something that shapes. And within that idea, there is both danger and insight, because while fear can be used to control and to harm, it can also show what lies beneath the surface, what drives people, what they seek to avoid, what they must confront. Scarecrow moves within this space, exploring it, expanding it, turning it into something that continues to influence Gotham, something that lingers even when the immediate effects fade, a reminder that fear, once awakened, does not simply disappear, but remains, waiting, shaping the way the world is seen. Strength without control, Bane. There are figures in Gotham who rely on fear, others who rely on chaos, and some who rely on careful planning. But there is one who combines all of these in a way that feels steady and deliberate. Someone who does not rush into action without thought. Someone who observes, who studies, who prepares before making a move. And that figure is Bane, a man often seen as a symbol of strength, but whose true power lies not only in his body, but in his mind, in the way he approaches every challenge with patience and purpose. Bane's story does not begin in Gotham, but in a place far from it, a harsh environment where survival is not guaranteed, where strength must be built over time, where learning and adaptation are necessary. And in that place, he grows not only physically, but mentally, developing a deep understanding of how systems work, how people behave, how pressure can be applied in ways that lead to specific outcomes. This background shapes him in a way that is different from many others who come to Gotham, because he does not arrive as someone reacting to the city, but as someone prepared to study it, to understand it, and to act with intention. When Bane turns his attention toward Gotham, and more specifically toward Batman, his approach is not immediate or impulsive, but measured, because he recognizes that defeating someone like Batman requires more than strength, more than a single encounter, more than a direct confrontation. He observes first, learning patterns, understanding behavior, identifying weaknesses, not in a simple physical sense, but in a broader way, looking at how Batman operates, how he responds, how he manages the constant pressure of protecting the city. This observation leads to a plan, a process that unfolds over time, where Bane does not strike at once, but instead creates conditions that will weaken his opponent, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, gradually reducing the ability to respond effectively. He understands that strength alone is not enough, that even the strongest can be worn down, that even the most disciplined can be pushed toward exhaustion if the pressure is applied in the right way over a long enough period. This is where his calculated intelligence becomes most visible, because each action is part of a larger structure, each move connected to the next, creating a sequence that leads toward a specific goal. He does not rely on chance or unpredictability in the same way as others, but on careful design, on understanding cause and effect, on controlling the pace of events so that the outcome becomes more likely. His mission to break Batman is not limited to defeating him in a physical sense, but extends to breaking the idea of Batman, the symbol, the presence that stands against chaos in Gotham. Bane sees that Batman's strength comes not only from his abilities, but from his endurance, from his ability to continue despite constant pressure, and so he aims to target that endurance, to push it beyond its limits, to create a situation where continuation becomes difficult, where the balance between effort and exhaustion begins to shift. This process is not quick, but gradual, because Bane understands that true breaking does not happen in a single moment, but through accumulation, through repeated strain, through the slow wearing down of resistance. He creates situations where Batman must respond again and again, where rest becomes limited, where the demands of the city increase, where the ability to recover is reduced, and in doing so, he weakens him over time. When the final confrontation comes, it is not simply a clash of strength, but the result of everything that has come before, a moment where the physical encounter reflects the mental and emotional strain that has been building, where the outcome is shaped not only by what happens in that moment, but by the entire process that led to it. Bane does not rely on surprise, but on preparation, on ensuring that when the confrontation occurs, the conditions are already in his favor. At the center of Bane's physical power is the substance known as venom, a compound that enhances his strength, increases his endurance, and allows him to perform at levels beyond what would normally be possible. This substance is not simply a tool, but a key part of his identity, something that defines how he operates, how he fights, how he maintains his physical advantage. Venom works by amplifying what is already present, taking existing strength and pushing it further. But this amplification comes with a cost, because it creates a dependency, a need to maintain the flow of the substance in order to sustain that level of power. This creates a balance that must be managed, because while venom provides strength, it also requires control, and without that control, the effects can become unstable. Bane's relationship with venom reflects the larger theme of strength without control, because while he possesses great power, that power is tied to something external, something that must be maintained, something that can influence him in return. He does not ignore this dependency, but works within it, managing it, integrating it into his approach. But the presence of that dependency remains, shaping his actions. This dual nature of power and dependence adds complexity to his character, because it shows that strength is not always simple, that it can come with conditions, that it can require balance, that it can create vulnerabilities, even as it provides advantage. Bane is aware of this, and this awareness is part of what allows him to use venom effectively, to maintain control over its effects, to prevent it from overwhelming him. In Gotham, Bane represents a different kind of threat, one that combines physical strength with strategic thinking, one that does not rely on chaos or unpredictability, but on structure and planning, one that approaches conflict as a process rather than a single event. This makes him a unique opponent, because he challenges both the body and the mind, both the immediate response and the long-term strategy. For Batman, this creates a situation that requires adaptation, because the usual methods may not be enough, because the challenge is not only in the moment, but in the build-up, in the preparation, in the ability to recognize and respond to a plan that unfolds over time. It requires awareness not only of what is happening, but of what is coming next, of how each action fits into a larger pattern. The encounter between them becomes a reflection of different approaches to strength, one based on endurance and discipline, the other based on calculation and enhancement. And within that reflection, the outcome is shaped by the balance between these elements, by the ability to maintain control, to adapt, to respond under pressure. In the end, Bane stands as a figure who shows that strength is not only about force, but about understanding, about preparation, about the ability to shape events before they occur. His use of venom highlights the balance between power and dependence. His strategy highlights the importance of planning, and his mission highlights the idea that breaking someone is not only about what happens in a single moment, but about the process that leads to that moment. And within that process, within that careful unfolding of events, the idea of strength without control remains central, a reminder that power, no matter how great, must always be balanced, must always be managed, must always be understood, because without that understanding, even the greatest strength can become unstable, and even the most carefully built plan can begin to shift. The cold logic of survival, Mr. Freeze. In a city where emotion often runs high, and actions are driven by anger, fear, or chaos, there is one figure whose presence feels quiet, controlled, and almost distant, as if every movement is measured, every word chosen carefully, and that figure is Victor Freeze, known as Mr. Freeze, a man whose story does not begin with destruction or ambition, but with love, with loss, and with a decision that slowly changes everything that follows. His actions, when seen from the outside, may appear cold and calculated, but beneath that surface lies a deeper story, one shaped by the need to hold on to something that has already begun to fade. Before he became Mr. Freeze, Victor Freeze was a scientist, someone who worked with focus and discipline, studying fields that required patience, precision, and a strong understanding of how systems function. His work was not driven by a desire for power, but by a desire to solve problems, to find answers, to use knowledge in a way that could make a difference. At the center of his life was his connection to his wife, Nora, whose illness became the turning point that shifted his path from one of study to one of survival. Nora's condition was not something that could be easily treated with existing methods, and this created a situation where Victor had to look beyond what was already known, beyond standard approaches, into areas that carried risk, uncertainty, and ethical questions. His decision to preserve her through cryogenic suspension was not taken lightly, but it was driven by a single goal: to keep her alive in a state where time would not continue to harm her, to create a chance, however uncertain, for a future where a cure might be found. This moment, where science meets emotion, where logic is used to protect something deeply personal, becomes the foundation of everything that follows, because it places Victor in a position where his actions are no longer guided by simple rules, but by a need that outweighs those rules. The accident that transforms him into Mr. Freeze adds another layer to this, altering his body in a way that changes how he experiences the world, forcing him into a state where extreme cold becomes necessary for his survival. This physical transformation mirrors the emotional shift that is also taking place, because as his environment becomes colder, so too does the way he interacts with others, not in the sense that he no longer feels, but in the sense that those feelings are held beneath the surface, controlled, contained, expressed only in indirect ways. His voice becomes steady, his actions precise, his focus unwavering, creating an image of someone who operates through logic rather than emotion. And yet, this logic is not separate from his humanity, but built around it, because every action he takes, every decision he makes, connects back to Nora, to the promise of saving her, to the belief that what he is doing is necessary. This creates a contrast that defines his character, where the cold, controlled exterior hides a deeply personal motivation, where logic serves emotion rather than replacing it. In Gotham, this makes him different from many others, because while others may act for power, revenge, or chaos, his actions are driven by a single purpose, one that does not change, one that remains constant even as everything else shifts. He does not seek to create disorder, but will cause it if it becomes necessary to achieve his goal. He does not act without reason, but his reasoning does not always align with the laws or expectations of the city. His methods reflect his background, because he approaches problems as a scientist, analyzing situations, identifying solutions, applying knowledge in ways that are efficient and direct. When he needs resources, he takes them, not with unnecessary force, but with precision, focusing on what is required, minimizing what is not. This creates a pattern where his actions feel controlled, even when they cause harm, because they are guided by a clear objective. The environment he creates around himself also reflects this state. Spaces that are cold, quiet, controlled, where temperature becomes part of the structure, where everything is adjusted to support his survival and his work. These environments feel different from the rest of Gotham, separated not only by temperature, but by atmosphere, by the sense that emotion has been reduced, that everything is focused on function. For Batman, this presents a different kind of challenge, because while many opponents can be understood through their actions, through patterns of behavior, Mr. Freeze requires a deeper level of understanding, one that considers not only what he is doing, but why he is doing it. Stopping him is not simply about preventing harm, but about recognizing the motivation behind it, about seeing the connection between his actions and his past. Their encounters often carry a different tone, less chaotic, more measured, where each movement is deliberate, where the conflict feels less like a clash and more like a struggle between two different approaches to solving a problem. Batman seeks to protect the city and its people, while Mr. Freeze seeks to save Nora, and within that difference lies the tension, because both are driven by purpose. but those purposes do not align. The use of technology becomes central to his identity because it allows him to survive, to function, to act in a world that would otherwise be hostile to him. His suit, his weapons, his environment all work together to maintain the conditions he needs, creating a system that supports his existence. This reliance on technology adds another layer to his character, because it shows how his life is now dependent on systems he must maintain, on structures he must control. At the same time, there are moments where the humanity beneath the surface becomes visible, where his connection to Nora is expressed not through emotion in the usual sense, but through action, through the lengths he is willing to go, through the risks he takes, through the consistency of his purpose. These moments remind us that the cold exterior is not the absence of feeling, but a way of managing it, a way of continuing in a situation where direct expression may no longer be possible. In the larger context of Gotham, Mr. Freeze represents the intersection of science and emotion, the point where logic is used to serve a deeply personal goal, where the desire to save someone leads to actions that challenge the system, that push against the boundaries of what is acceptable. His story reflects the idea that not all threats come from a desire to harm, but from a desire to protect, even when that protection takes a form that causes conflict. This creates a sense of complexity, because it is difficult to place him within simple categories, difficult to see him as only a villain, because his actions are tied to something understandable, something human, even if the way he pursues that goal leads to outcomes that must be stopped. This tension adds depth to his story, making it more than a simple conflict, turning it into a reflection of difficult choices, of competing priorities. In the end, the cold logic of survival becomes the defining element of Mr. Freeze, a balance between control and emotion, between science and personal connection, between what must be done and what is felt beneath the surface. His story shows how far someone might go when driven by love and loss, how the need to hold on to something can shape every aspect of a person's life. And within that balance, within that quiet, controlled presence, there remains a sense that beneath the cold, beneath the logic, beneath the carefully measured actions, there is still something human, something that has not disappeared, but has simply been placed in a different form, waiting, held in place, like the frozen world he has created around himself. Beauty and poison, poison ivy. In a city built of steel, glass, and concrete, where nature is often pushed aside to make space for progress, there is a figure who stands in quiet opposition to that idea. Someone who does not see Gotham as something to protect, but as something that has already caused harm. And that figure is Pamela Isley, known as Poison Ivy, a woman whose transformation does not begin with chaos or violence, but with change, with exposure, with a shift that connects her to something older, something deeper, something that exists beyond the systems that define the city. Before she became Poison Ivy, Pamela Isley was a scientist, someone who studied plants, who understood their structure, their growth, their connection to the environment. And her work was focused on understanding how life functions at a level that is often overlooked. Because plants do not speak or move in ways that draw attention, but they exist as part of a larger system, connected to the air, the soil, the water, forming networks that support life in quiet, steady ways. Pamela's interest in this field suggests a desire to understand those connections, to see how different elements come together to create balance. The transformation that changes her path is not simple, because it involves both science and accident, both intention and consequence, as chemicals and biological changes alter her body, shifting her from someone who studies plants to someone who is connected to them in a direct and physical way. This connection is not symbolic, but real, allowing her to interact with plant life in ways that go beyond normal limits, to influence growth, to communicate through subtle signals, to become part of the system she once observed from the outside. As this connection grows stronger, so does her perspective, because she begins to see the world not only through human experience, but through a wider lens, one that includes the environment as a whole, one that recognizes the damage caused by human activity, the imbalance created by expansion, the way nature is often treated as something to be used rather than respected. This shift leads to a rejection of the values she once held, a movement away from human-centered thinking towards something that places nature at the center instead. In Gotham, this perspective stands in contrast to the city's structure, because the environment around her reflects human control, human design, human influence, and Poison Ivy sees this not as progress, but as harm, as something that disrupts the natural balance, something that must be corrected. This belief shapes her actions, guiding her decisions, influencing how she interacts with the world around her. Her connection to plants is not only functional, but emotional, because she relates to them in a way that replaces her connection to humanity, seeing them as something pure, something honest, something that exists without the same complexity and conflict that she associates with human society. This creates a distance between her and others, a separation that grows over time as she identifies more with the natural world and less with the human one. At the same time, this connection gives her power, the ability to control plant life, to use it as both protection and weapon, to shape environments in ways that reflect her goals. Vines can grow where they are needed, roots can break through structures, plants can respond to her presence, creating a space where nature reclaims what has been taken. This power is not random, but guided by her intent, by her understanding of how systems function, by her belief in what needs to be changed. The idea of beauty becomes part of her identity because the plants she controls, the environments she creates, often carry a sense of natural order, a form of balance that contrasts with the harsh lines of the city. There is a calmness in these spaces, a sense of harmony, but this beauty is not separate from danger, because the same plants that create these environments can also cause harm, can trap, can poison, can protect in ways that are not gentle. This is where the idea of poison becomes important, because it represents the dual nature of her actions, the way something that can sustain life can also end it, depending on how it is used. Her toxins, derived from plants, reflect this balance, because they are part of the natural world, but applied in ways that serve her goals, blurring the line between natural function and deliberate action. For Poison Ivy, the line between protection and destruction is not always clear, because, from her perspective, protecting nature may require actions that harm those who threaten it. And this creates a situation where her intentions and her methods do not always align with the values of others. She may see herself as a protector, as someone restoring balance, while others see her as a threat, as someone disrupting the system. This difference in perspective adds complexity to her story, because it raises questions about what protection means, about who decides what should be preserved and what should be removed, about how balance is defined and maintained. Her actions challenge the idea that there is a single correct approach, showing that different viewpoints can lead to different conclusions. In her interactions with Batman, this tension becomes more visible, because he represents the effort to maintain order within the city, to protect its people, while she represents a challenge to that order, a push toward a different kind of balance, one that may not include the same structures. Their encounters often reflect this difference, creating situations where neither side fully aligns with the other, where the conflict is not only physical, but philosophical. Batman must consider not only how to stop her actions, but how to understand them, how to recognize the motivation behind them, how to respond in a way that protects the city, while also acknowledging the issues she raises. This adds a layer to their encounters, making them more than simple confrontations, turning them into moments of reflection on the larger system. Within Arkham, Poison Ivy's presence carries this same complexity, because she does not simply exist as a patient, but as a figure who continues to hold her beliefs, who continues to see the world through the lens she has developed. The environment of Arkham, with its controlled spaces, contrasts with her connection to nature, creating a tension that reflects the larger conflict between the city and the natural world. Her identity as both beauty and poison reflects the balance within her, the combination of creation and destruction, of protection and harm, of calm and danger. She embodies the idea that these elements are not always separate, that they can exist together, that one can lead to the other depending on the situation. In the end, Poison Ivy stands as a reminder that the world is made of interconnected systems, that actions have effects beyond immediate outcomes, that the balance between human activity and natural processes is not always stable. Her story reflects the consequences of imbalance, the response to perceived harm, the effort to restore what has been lost. And within that story, there remains a quiet question, not about whether she is right or wrong, but about how the world should be understood, how balance should be maintained, how different forces should coexist. The answer is not simple, and perhaps it is not meant to be, because like the plants she controls, the story continues to grow, to change, to adapt, moving forward without a clear end, rooted in the tension between beauty and poison, between what is protected and what is lost. Chaos in Motion, Harley Quinn. There are stories in Gotham that begin with clear lines, where a person knows who they are, what they believe, and how they fit into the world around them. And then there are stories that begin in a quiet, steady way, but slowly shift, changing direction over time, until those lines are no longer clear, until identity itself becomes something uncertain, something that moves and changes, depending on what influences it. And this is the kind of story that belongs to Harleen Quinzel, who would later become known as Harley Quinn. Before the name Harley Quinn ever echoed through the halls of Arkham or across the streets of Gotham, Harleen Quinzel was a doctor, a psychiatrist who studied the human mind, who worked within a system designed to understand behavior, to treat those who struggled, to bring order to thoughts that had become unstable. She was intelligent, focused, and driven by a desire to make sense of the patterns she observed, to help those who had lost their way, to apply what she had learned in a way that could create change. Her work brought her into contact with some of Gotham's most dangerous individuals, but among them, there was one who stood apart, not because he was quiet or controlled, but because he was unpredictable, because he did not respond in the usual ways, because he turned every conversation into something more, something layered, something that carried meaning beneath the surface. This was the Joker, and from the moment their interactions began, there was a shift, not sudden, but gradual, as Harleen found herself drawn into a dynamic that was different from anything she had experienced before. At first, the connection may have seemed professional, a doctor studying a patient, observing behavior, asking questions, trying to understand the patterns that defined his actions. But the Joker does not exist within simple structures, and over time, the lines between observer and participant began to blur. He spoke in ways that challenged her thinking, that questioned her assumptions, that introduced ideas that did not fit neatly into the frameworks she had been taught to rely on. This interaction created a space where Harleen's perspective began to change, where her understanding of the world, of herself, of her role within it, started to shift, influenced not only by what the Joker said, but by how he said it, by the way he framed ideas, by the way he turned conversations into something that felt personal, something that felt meaningful, even when that meaning was not clear. Her origin as Harley Quinn is not marked by a single moment, but by a series of small changes that build over time, as her connection to the Joker grows stronger, as her identity begins to adjust, as the boundaries that once defined her role become less stable. She moves from observer to participant, from professional distance to personal involvement, from understanding to identification, and in doing so, she steps into a new identity that is shaped not only by her own choices, but by the influence of someone else. This devotion to the Joker becomes one of the central aspects of her character, because it defines how she acts, how she sees the world, how she understands her place within it. It is not a simple attachment, but a complex bond that includes elements of trust, admiration, confusion, and dependence, creating a dynamic that is both strong and unstable at the same time. As Harley Quinn, she moves differently, speaks differently, behaves in ways that reflect both her past and her present, combining elements of who she once was with the influence of what she has become. There are moments where her intelligence remains visible, where her understanding of the mind still shapes her actions. But these moments exist alongside a new unpredictability, a willingness to act without the same level of control, a shift towards spontaneity that contrasts with her earlier discipline. This creates a sense of movement within her character, a constant shift between different states, between moments of clarity and moments of chaos, between innocence and unpredictability. There are times when she appears playful, light, almost carefree, and other times when her actions carry weight, when the consequences of what she does become more visible, creating a contrast that defines her presence. Her innocence is not the same as it once was, because it has been shaped by her experiences, by her connection to the Joker, by the changes she has gone through, but it has not disappeared completely. Instead, it exists alongside her unpredictability, creating a layered identity where different aspects appear at different times, depending on the situation, depending on her state of mind. This unpredictability is not random, but influenced by the dynamic she shares with the Joker, because his presence shapes her actions, his ideas influence her thinking, his behavior creates a pattern that she responds to, even when that response changes over time. This creates a situation where her identity is not entirely her own, but also not entirely defined by him, existing somewhere between independence and influence. The struggle between identity and influence becomes one of the most important parts of her story, because it reflects the ongoing tension within her, the effort to understand who she is, separate from the role she has taken on, separate from the connection that has shaped her. This struggle is not always visible, but it is present in the shifts in her behavior, in the moments where she questions, where she changes direction, where she moves away from or toward the influence that has defined her. In Gotham, this creates a unique presence, because Harley Quinn does not fit neatly into a single category, not fully villain, not fully victim, not fully independent, not fully controlled. She exists in motion, changing, adapting, responding, creating a dynamic that is different from others who follow more consistent patterns. Her interactions with Batman reflect this complexity, because he must respond not only to her actions, but to the uncertainty behind them, to the shifting nature of her identity, to the possibility that her behavior may change, that her motivations may not remain constant. This adds a layer to their encounters, making them less predictable, more fluid, more connected to the moment. Within Arkham, her presence carries the same sense of movement, because the environment interacts with her identity, shaping it, responding to it, creating situations where the struggle between who she was and who she has become continues. The walls of Arkham do not fix her identity, but contain it temporarily, allowing it to exist within a controlled space that does not fully resolve the tension within her. Over time, Harley Quinn becomes a figure that represents the idea that identity is not always stable, that it can be influenced, that it can change, that it can exist in different forms depending on the circumstances. Her story shows how connection can shape a person, how influence can alter direction, how the line between self and other can become blurred. And within that story, there is always movement, always change, always the sense that what she is today may not be what she will be tomorrow, that her path is not fixed, that her identity continues to evolve. This is what makes her presence feel alive, not settled, not complete, but ongoing, shaped by each moment, each interaction, each choice. In the end, Harley Quinn stands as a reflection of transformation, of the way a person can shift over time, of the way identity can be influenced and reshaped, of the way innocence and unpredictability can exist together. Her story does not resolve into a single form, but continues, moving forward, changing, adapting, a constant motion within the larger pattern of Gotham, a reminder that some identities are not meant to stay still, but to evolve, to question, to exist in the space between what was and what is becoming. The predator in the dark killer Croc. There are parts of Gotham that most people do not see, places that exist beneath the streets, beneath the noise, beneath the movement of the city above, and in those hidden spaces, where light is limited and sound travels in strange ways, there lives a figure who has become more legend than man, someone spoken of in whispers, someone feared not only for what he does, but for what he represents, and that figure is Waylon Jones, known as Killer Croc, a presence shaped by both the world around him and the way the world has treated him. Before the name Killer Croc became something that carried fear, Waylon Jones was a person born with a condition that set him apart from others from the very beginning. His skin different, his features unusual, his appearance something that drew attention, not in a way that brought understanding, but in a way that created distance, discomfort, and often rejection. From early on, he was not seen as someone who belonged, but as something different, something outside the expected, and this difference became the starting point of a path that would lead him further and further away from the world above. As he grew older, the way others responded to him began to shape his experience, because where there might have been space for acceptance, there was often fear, and where there might have been understanding, there was often judgment. This repeated pattern created a situation where Waylon was pushed toward isolation, not always by choice, but by the absence of a place where he could exist without being seen as a threat. Over time, this isolation became not only a result of how others treated him, but a condition that shaped how he saw himself. The transformation from Waylon Jones to Killer Croc is not defined by a single moment, but by a gradual shift, a movement away from human connection and towards something more instinctive, more focused on survival, more shaped by the environment in which he found himself. The sewers and underground spaces of Gotham became his territory, not because they were welcoming, but because they offered distance, because they allowed him to exist without constant confrontation, because they matched the sense of separation he had already begun to feel. In these spaces, survival becomes the central focus, because the conditions are harsh, the resources limited, and the need to adapt constant. Waylon learns to move through these environments with skill, to navigate the darkness, to understand the patterns of the underground, to use what is available to sustain himself. This process strengthens his physical abilities, enhances his connection to his surroundings, but also reinforces the separation from the world above, creating a deeper divide between who he was and who he is becoming. This is where the idea of him as both victim and threat becomes most clear, because his situation is shaped by forces beyond his control, by how he was born, by how he was treated, by how he was pushed into isolation, and in this sense, he can be seen as someone affected by the system, someone who reflects its failures, its inability to accept difference, its tendency to reject what it does not understand. At the same time, his actions, shaped by survival and instinct, create danger, because in protecting himself, in securing what he needs, he may act in ways that cause harm, that reinforce the fear others already feel. This dual nature creates a complex picture, because it is not enough to see him only as a threat, nor is it enough to see him only as a victim, but rather as a combination of both, a person shaped by circumstances who has adapted in ways that reflect those circumstances. His behavior cannot be separated from his experience, and understanding him requires looking at both aspects together. As his time in isolation continues, the influence of the environment becomes stronger, because the lack of human interaction, the focus on survival, the constant need to respond to immediate conditions all contribute to a shift in how he thinks, how he reacts, how he experiences the world. The instincts that guide animals, the responses that prioritize safety and sustenance begin to take a more central role, while the aspects of human behavior that rely on social connection, on communication, on shared understanding begin to fade. This does not mean that his humanity disappears completely, but it becomes less visible, less dominant, existing beneath layers of adaptation that have formed over time. There may still be moments where that humanity appears, brief glimpses of recognition, of memory, of connection. But these moments are often overshadowed by the stronger patterns that now define his behavior. The physical transformation that marks his appearance also plays a role in this process, because it reinforces the separation, the sense that he is different, that he does not belong in the same spaces as others. His body becomes both a tool for survival and a barrier to connection, something that allows him to move through his environment effectively, but also something that prevents him from returning to the world he once knew. In Gotham, Killer Croc becomes part of the city's hidden layer, a presence that exists beneath the surface, influencing events in ways that are not always visible but are always felt. Stories about him spread, creating a sense of fear that extends beyond direct encounters, shaping how people think about the spaces he inhabits, how they move through the city, how they understand what lies beneath. For Batman, this presents a different kind of challenge, because while many opponents can be approached through strategy and planning, Killer Croc requires a different understanding, one that takes into account his environment, his instincts, his way of moving through the world. Confronting him is not only about stopping his actions, but about entering his space, about adapting to conditions that are unfamiliar, about recognizing the patterns that guide his behavior. Their encounters often take place in the darkness of the underground, where visibility is limited, where sound becomes more important, where movement must be careful and precise. In these moments, the difference between them becomes more pronounced, because Batman relies on control and preparation, while Killer Croc relies on instinct and adaptation, creating a dynamic where each must respond to the other in real time. At the same time, there is an awareness that beneath the surface, beneath the instinct, there is still a person, someone who was shaped by experience, someone who carries a history that cannot be erased. And this awareness adds depth to the encounter, making it more than a simple conflict, turning it into a reflection of what happens when a person is pushed too far from connection, too far from acceptance. The loss of humanity in this context is not a complete removal, but a covering, a layering of new behaviors over old ones, a shift in what is visible and what is hidden. The instincts that guide him become stronger because they are necessary, because they support survival, because they match the environment, while the aspects of humanity that require connection and understanding become less central, less supported by the conditions around him. In the end, Killer Croc stands as a figure shaped by both nature and circumstance, by both his physical condition and his experience, by both the way he was born and the way he was treated. His story reflects the impact of isolation, the power of environment, the way survival can shape identity, the way humanity can become hidden when it is not supported. And within that story, there remains a quiet question, not about whether he is one thing or another, but about how different elements come together to create a life, about how choices and conditions interact, about how a person can become something else over time, not through a single moment, but through a series of changes that build upon each other. In the darkness beneath Gotham, where the city's hidden spaces stretch out in silence, Killer Croc continues to exist, moving through the shadows, shaped by the world around him, a presence that reflects both the danger and the distance that define his life, a reminder that what is pushed away does not disappear, but remains, adapting, surviving, becoming something that cannot be easily understood, but can always be felt. The mind that watches, Hugo Strange. There are people in Gotham who use force, others who use fear, and many who rely on chaos. But there is one figure whose power comes from something quieter, something less visible, something that does not strike directly, but instead observes, studies, and understands before acting. And that figure is Hugo Strange, a man who does not need to move quickly or loudly, because he has already placed himself in a position where knowledge itself becomes his greatest advantage. He stands within Arkham not only as a warden, not only as someone responsible for maintaining order, but as someone who sees the institution as more than a place of control, seeing it instead as a space filled with information, with patterns, with minds that can be studied and understood. Arkham Asylum, with its many patients and its long history, provides Hugo Strange with what he values most, which is access, because within its walls are individuals whose thoughts and behaviors do not follow ordinary patterns, individuals who reveal the extremes of human experience, individuals who can be observed over time, analyzed, compared, and understood in ways that are not possible in the outside world. For Strange, this environment is not simply a responsibility, but an opportunity, a place where his interest in the human mind can be pursued without limitation. His approach is careful and deliberate because he does not rush into conclusions, but instead gathers information, piece by piece, observing behavior, noting reactions, studying how different individuals respond to different situations. He does not rely on surface impressions, but looks deeper, seeking the patterns that connect actions to thoughts, that reveal the structure beneath behavior. This process requires patience, and Strange possesses that patience, allowing him to build a detailed understanding over time. What makes Hugo Strange different from many others in Gotham is not only his intelligence, but the way he uses it, because knowledge for him is not only something to hold, but something to apply, something that can influence others, something that can create control. He understands that if one can predict how a person will respond, then one can guide that response, can shape the situation in a way that leads to a desired outcome. And this understanding forms the basis of his approach. As the Warden of Arkham, he is in a position where he can observe both the patients and those who come to interact with them, including Batman, whose presence within the asylum becomes a point of focus for Strange, not only because of what Batman does, but because of what he represents. Batman is a figure of control within Gotham, someone who operates with discipline, someone who maintains a clear structure in his actions. And for Hugo Strange, this makes him not just an ally or an opponent, but a subject of study. His interest in Batman goes beyond the surface, beyond the visible actions, into the identity beneath the mask, into the question of who he is when he is not acting as Batman, into the connection between the man and the symbol. This curiosity becomes an obsession, not in a loud or uncontrolled way, but in a focused, persistent way. As Strange gathers information, observes patterns, studies behavior, and slowly builds a picture of the person behind the mask. This process reflects his belief that identity is not something hidden beyond reach, but something that can be uncovered through careful observation, through analysis, through understanding how different elements come together to form a whole. He does not see Batman as an unknown figure, but as a puzzle that can be solved, a structure that can be understood if enough information is gathered and correctly interpreted. Control, for Hugo Strange, does not come from physical strength, but from knowledge, because once he understands someone, once he knows how they think, how they respond, what drives them, he gains the ability to influence them, to guide their actions without direct force. This form of control is subtle, often unnoticed, because it operates through suggestion, through manipulation, through the shaping of circumstances, rather than direct confrontation. Within Arkham, this ability becomes even more powerful because the environment itself supports it, providing access to information, to records, to interactions that can be observed and analyzed. Strange moves through this environment not as a passive observer, but as an active participant, shaping it, adjusting it, using it as a tool to further his understanding and extend his influence. For the patients within Arkham, this creates a situation where their thoughts and behaviors are not only being treated or contained, but also studied in ways that may serve purposes beyond their immediate care. Strange's interest is not always aligned with their well-being, because his focus is on understanding, on control, on the application of knowledge. And this can lead to situations where individuals become part of a larger process, part of an experiment in understanding the mind. When it comes to Batman, this dynamic becomes more complex because Batman is not easily influenced, not easily predicted, not easily controlled, and this makes him both a challenge and a target for Strange. The more difficult it is to understand him, the more effort Strange puts into that understanding. The more he observes, the more he analyzes, the more he refines his approach. Their interactions often carry a quiet tension, because while Batman operates with awareness and caution, Strange operates with knowledge and intent, creating a situation where each is aware of the other, where each understands that there is more happening beneath the surface than what is immediately visible. This creates a kind of psychological exchange, where control is not determined by physical dominance, but by understanding. Strange's obsession with Batman's identity reflects a deeper belief that knowing who someone truly is provides power, that identity is the key to control, that once the mask is removed, both literally and figuratively, the person becomes more predictable, more manageable, more open to influence. This belief drives his actions, shaping how he approaches the problem, guiding his decisions. At the same time, this obsession reveals something about Strange himself, about his need to understand, to control, to define, because in seeking to uncover Batman's identity, he is also reinforcing his own position as someone who sees beyond the surface, someone who does not accept mystery as something that must remain unresolved, but as something that can be explored and explained. In the larger context of Gotham, Hugo Strange represents a different kind of power, one that does not rely on chaos or fear, but on observation, on analysis, on the careful application of knowledge. His presence highlights the role of the mind in shaping events, the way understanding can influence outcomes, the way control can be achieved without direct force. Arkham, under his watch, becomes more than a place of containment, becoming instead a network of information, a system that can be used to observe and influence, a space where the lines between treatment and manipulation can become blurred. This adds another layer to the institution, making it not only a reflection of Gotham's broken system, but also a tool that can be used in ways that extend beyond its original purpose. In the end, Hugo Strange stands as a figure who watches, who studies, who understands, who uses knowledge as both shield and weapon, who moves within the shadows of thought rather than the shadows of the city. His story is one of observation and control, of the belief that the mind can be mapped, that behavior can be predicted, that identity can be uncovered. And within that belief, there is both power and danger, because while knowledge can provide understanding, it can also be used to manipulate, to control, to shape others in ways they may not be aware of. Strange moves within this space, balancing between insight and influence, between study and control, a presence that reminds us that sometimes the most powerful force is not what can be seen, but what can be understood, and that the mind, once fully observed, can become a place where control is not imposed, but quietly achieved. The puppet master, Ra's al Ghul. There are figures in Gotham who act in the moment, who respond to what is happening around them, who move with urgency and emotion. But there are also those who think far beyond the present, who look at the world not as it is now, but as it might become over time. And among them stands Ra's al Ghul, a man whose actions are guided not by impulse, but by long-term vision, by the belief that the world follows patterns that can be shaped, corrected, and controlled if one has the patience and the will to act across generations rather than moments. Ra's al Ghul does not see himself as a simple ruler or a conqueror, but as a caretaker of balance, someone who believes that the world moves in cycles, that growth leads to excess, that excess leads to decay, and that decay must be followed by renewal. In his view, this renewal does not happen on its own, but must be guided, must be enforced when necessary, and this belief forms the foundation of everything he does. His leadership of the League of Assassins is not based only on power, but on structure, on discipline, on the idea that those who follow him are part of a larger purpose, part of a system that extends beyond individual lives. The League itself operates with precision, with order, with a sense of unity that reflects Ra's al Ghul's influence, because he does not tolerate disorder within his ranks, even as he seeks to bring destruction to the world beyond. This contrast is important because it shows that his vision is not about chaos for its own sake, but about controlled change, about removing what he sees as imbalance in order to create a new form of stability. He does not act randomly, but with intention, choosing his moments carefully, selecting his targets based on what he believes will lead to the desired outcome. His idea of balance through destruction may seem extreme, but in his perspective, it is necessary because he sees the world as something that has grown beyond its limits, where cities like Gotham have become symbols of excess, of corruption, of systems that no longer serve their purpose. In his view, allowing this to continue would lead to greater collapse, and so he chooses to act, to intervene, to reduce what has grown too large, to clear the way for something new to emerge. This approach requires patience, because the changes he seeks are not immediate, but unfold over time through a series of actions that build upon each other, creating a larger effect that may not be visible at first. He plans not for days or weeks, but for years, sometimes decades, considering how events will connect, how one action will lead to another, how the outcome can be shaped gradually rather than forced in a single moment. This long-term thinking is what makes him a puppet master in a deeper sense, because he does not always act directly, but instead sets conditions, influences events, guides others into positions where they become part of his plan, often without fully realizing it. He understands how systems work, how people respond to pressure, how situations can be arranged so that the desired outcome becomes more likely, even if it appears to happen naturally. In this way, his control is not always visible, but it is present, shaping the flow of events, guiding the movement of forces within Gotham and beyond. He does not need to be at the center of every action, because his influence extends through the structures he has created, through the people who follow him, through the plans he has set in motion. His connection to Batman is one of the most important aspects of his story, because it reflects both opposition and recognition, conflict and respect. Ra's al Ghul sees in Batman something that others do not, a strength of will, a discipline, a commitment to purpose that aligns, in some ways, with his own values, even if their methods differ greatly. This recognition leads him to view Batman not only as an enemy, but as a potential successor, someone who could carry forward his vision in a different form. This idea of succession is not simple, because it is tied to Ra's al Ghul's belief in continuity, in the need for his work to extend beyond his own life, in the importance of passing on knowledge and purpose to someone capable of maintaining it. In Batman, he sees a candidate who has the strength and the discipline required, but who is limited by his refusal to cross certain lines, particularly the refusal to kill, which stands in direct opposition to Ra's al Ghul's methods. This creates a tension between them, because while Ra's al Ghul respects Batman, he also seeks to change him, to push him toward a different understanding, to convince him that his methods are necessary, that the balance he seeks cannot be achieved without sacrifice, without decisive action that goes beyond restraint. Batman, in turn, rejects this view, holding on to his principles, maintaining his belief that there is another way to protect the city, even if that way is more difficult. Their encounters often reflect this tension, because they are not only physical confrontations, but philosophical exchanges, where ideas are tested, where beliefs are challenged, where each tries to influence the other. Ra's al Ghul may present arguments, situations, or examples meant to show the limits of Batman's approach, while Batman responds by demonstrating the value of his principles, the importance of restraint, the possibility of change without destruction. This dynamic creates a relationship that is more complex than simple opposition, because it includes elements of mentorship, of challenge, of recognition, even as it remains rooted in conflict. Ra's al Ghul does not see Batman as an obstacle alone, but as someone who could, under different circumstances, stand beside him, and this belief shapes how he interacts with him, adding layers to their encounters. In Gotham, Ra's al Ghul represents a different kind of threat, one that does not arise from chaos or personal gain, but from a vision that extends beyond the city, a plan that includes it as part of a larger system, a perspective that sees it not as something to be saved, but as something that may need to be changed or even removed for the sake of balance. This makes his actions more difficult to address because they are not limited to immediate events, but connected to a broader strategy. For Batman, this means facing not only a powerful opponent, but a philosophy that challenges his own, a vision that questions the effectiveness of his methods, a presence that forces him to consider the larger impact of his actions. It is not enough to stop a single plan, because the ideas behind it remain, the perspective continues, the influence extends beyond one moment. The League of Assassins, as an extension of Ra's al Ghul's will, reflects this continuity, because it operates with a sense of purpose that does not depend on a single event, but on an ongoing mission, a commitment to maintaining balance as they define it. Their actions are coordinated, their structure stable, their focus clear, creating a force that persists over time. In the end, Ra's al Ghul stands as a figure who believes in control through vision, in balance through destruction, in continuity through succession. His story reflects the idea that not all threats come from chaos, but from order taken to an extreme, from a belief so strong that it justifies actions others would not accept. And within that belief, there is both clarity and danger, because while the desire for balance is understandable, the method of achieving it through destruction raises questions that do not have easy answers. Ra's al Ghul moves within this space, guided by his vision, shaping events over time, a puppet master whose influence extends beyond the moment, into the future he seeks to create, whether others are willing to accept it or not. The broken knight, Azrael. There are those in Gotham who choose their path slowly, shaped by experience and reflection, and there are others whose path is chosen for them long before they fully understand what it means. And among them stands Azrael, a figure who does not begin as a symbol of chaos or even as a symbol of independent justice, but as something more controlled, more directed, a person shaped by a system that does not simply guide, but programs, shaping thought, behavior, and purpose from the inside. The identity of Azrael is tied to an order that exists beyond the surface of Gotham, a group that believes in structure, in discipline, in a clear definition of right and wrong, but also in control, in the idea that a person can be shaped into a tool, into something that serves a specific purpose without deviation. From a young age, the one who becomes Azrael is taught not only skills, but beliefs, patterns of thinking that are reinforced over time, creating a framework that becomes difficult to question because it feels natural, because it has always been there. This process creates a kind of internal structure that guides action without the need for constant decision, because the decisions have already been made, placed within the person through training, through repetition, through a system that defines what is correct and what is not. In this way, Azrael becomes a controlled weapon of order, someone who acts with precision, with purpose, with a clear sense of direction, but whose direction has been set by others. At first, this role may seem effective because it removes uncertainty, it removes hesitation, it creates a figure who can act quickly and decisively, who does not need to question each step because the path is already defined. In a city like Gotham, where hesitation can lead to harm, this kind of certainty can appear strong, even necessary. Azrael moves through situations with confidence, applying the structure he has been given, responding to threats with the force that has been trained into him. But beneath this controlled exterior, there is something else, something that begins to shift over time, something that does not fully align with the programming that guides him. And that is the presence of choice, the ability to question, to consider alternatives, to see beyond the structure that has been placed within him. This creates an internal struggle, a tension between what he has been taught and what he begins to understand for himself. This struggle is not immediate or clear, because when a system has been placed within a person for so long, it does not simply disappear, but remains, influencing thought, guiding reaction, shaping perception. Even when questions arise, even when doubt begins to form, the original programming continues to operate, creating conflict between different parts of the mind, between the learned response and the emerging awareness. For Azrael, this conflict becomes more visible when he encounters situations that do not fit neatly into the structure he has been given, when the clear lines between right and wrong become blurred, when the consequences of action extend beyond what he was prepared to consider. In these moments, the simplicity of his programming is challenged, and the need for understanding becomes more important. This is where the danger of blind justice becomes clear, because when action is taken without full understanding, when decisions are made based only on a fixed set of rules without consideration of context, the outcome can cause harm, even when the intention is to protect. Azrael's training does not always allow for nuance, for the recognition that situations can be complex, that people can exist in shades of grey rather than clear categories. In Gotham, where situations often carry multiple layers, where actions have consequences that extend beyond the immediate moment, this limitation becomes significant because it creates a gap between intention and result, between what is meant to be done and what actually happens. Azrael may act to enforce order, but in doing so, he may create further imbalance because the method does not always match the situation. His encounters with Batman highlight this difference, because Batman operates with a different approach, one that includes control and discipline, but also understanding, restraint, and the willingness to consider the broader impact of each action. Where Azrael may see a problem and move to eliminate it directly, Batman may pause, observe, and seek a solution that reduces harm rather than simply removing a threat. This contrast creates tension between them, because each represents a different approach to justice, one based on strict adherence to a defined system, the other based on a balance between structure and choice. Azrael may see Batman's restraint as weakness, while Batman may see Azrael's certainty as dangerous. And within this difference, their interactions become a reflection of larger questions about how justice should be carried out. As Azrael's internal struggle continues, the presence of choice becomes more difficult to ignore, because the more he experiences situations that do not fit his programming, the more he is forced to consider alternatives, to question the structure that has guided him. This does not happen all at once, but gradually, as small moments of doubt build into larger questions, as the awareness of complexity grows. This process is not easy, because it requires stepping away from the certainty that has defined his actions, moving into a space where decisions must be made without a fixed guide, where responsibility becomes more personal, where the outcome is no longer determined by a system, but by his own understanding. This transition creates uncertainty, but also the possibility of growth, of change, of a different kind of strength. The idea of being a broken knight reflects this state, because he is no longer fully aligned with the role he was given, but not yet fully independent either, existing between two states, between control and choice, between programming and awareness. This brokenness is not only a weakness, but also a point of transformation, a space where change can occur. In the larger context of Gotham, Azrael represents the risk of systems that prioritize control over understanding, that seek to create order through strict rules, without allowing for the complexity of real situations. His story shows how such systems can produce results that are not always aligned with their purpose, how the lack of flexibility can lead to outcomes that cause harm, even when the intention is to protect. At the same time, his journey reflects the possibility of change, the idea that even a person shaped by strong programming can begin to question, to adapt, to move toward a different understanding. This does not erase what has been done, but it opens the path to something new, something that includes both the strength of discipline and the awareness of complexity. In the end, Azrael stands as a figure caught between two ways of being, one defined by control, the other by choice, one shaped by external structure, the other by internal understanding. His struggle continues, not resolved in a single moment, but evolving over time, shaped by experience, by reflection, by the ongoing effort to find balance between order and awareness. And within that struggle, there remains a quiet question about what it means to act with justice, whether it is enough to follow rules, or whether understanding must also be part of the process, whether strength alone is sufficient, or whether it must be guided by something deeper. Azrael moves through this question, step by step, action by action, learning not only how to act, but how to choose. And in that movement, his story continues, not fixed, but changing, shaped by the tension between what he was made to be and what he may yet become. The mask of control, Black Mask. In Gotham City, where power often hides behind quiet doors and controlled voices, there are figures who do not rely on sudden chaos, but instead build their influence through structure, through networks, through systems that move in steady and calculated ways. And among them stands Roman Sionis, known as Black Mask, a man whose identity is shaped not only by his actions, but by what he chooses to hide and what he chooses to show. His story is not one of randomness or unpredictability, but of control, of the careful construction of power, and of the belief that fear, when used correctly, can hold everything in place. Before the name Black Mask became something feared within Gotham's underworld, Roman Sionis was part of a different kind of system, one that existed within the surface level of the city, connected to wealth, to business, to reputation. He grew up within a world that valued appearance, that placed importance on how things looked rather than how they truly were. And over time, this created a sense of distance, a feeling that the identity he was expected to present was not fully his own. This tension between appearance and reality became an important part of his development, shaping how he understood identity and control. As he moved away from that world and into the darker layers of Gotham, he did not leave behind the idea of control, but instead reshaped it, turning it into something more direct, more forceful, more aligned with the systems of organized crime. Unlike those who act alone or rely on unpredictable behavior, Roman Sionis builds networks, establishes connections, creates structures that allow him to extend his influence beyond his immediate presence. His power does not come from a single action, but from the system he maintains, the way each part supports the others, the way control is distributed and reinforced. The mask itself becomes central to his identity, not only as a physical object, but as a symbol of transformation, a way of separating who he was from who he has become, a way of creating a new presence that carries authority and fear. By covering his face, he removes the connection to his past identity, replacing it with something more controlled, more defined by his current role. The mask is not just protection, but expression, a statement that identity can be shaped, that it can be chosen, that it can be used as a tool. This connection between identity and control extends into how he interacts with others, because he expects those within his organization to follow structure, to respect hierarchy, to operate within the system he has created. Loyalty is not optional, but required, and it is maintained through a combination of reward and fear, through the understanding that deviation from the system will lead to consequences. This creates an environment where order is enforced, where unpredictability is reduced, where actions are guided by clear expectations. Fear plays a significant role in maintaining this structure because it ensures that control is not only based on agreement, but on the understanding of what will happen if that control is challenged. Roman Sionis uses fear as a tool, not in the chaotic way of others, but in a focused and deliberate manner, applying it where necessary to reinforce his authority, to maintain the stability of his organization. This use of fear is not about creating widespread panic, but about establishing boundaries, about ensuring that those within his system understand their place. In Gotham's underworld, this approach creates a contrast with figures like the Joker, whose actions disrupt structure, who reject systems, who introduce unpredictability into spaces that once operated with some level of order. Black Mask represents the opposite of this, a return to organized crime as it traditionally exists, with clear roles, defined territories, controlled operations. He sees value in this structure, in the ability to manage and direct activity in a way that produces consistent results. This contrast becomes more visible when their worlds intersect, when the structured approach of Roman Sionis meets the unpredictable nature of chaos, creating tension between two different ways of operating. For Black Mask, chaos is not useful because it disrupts the systems he relies on. It creates instability. It makes control more difficult. For others, chaos may be a tool, but for him, it is something to be contained or removed, something that threatens the balance he has established. At the same time, his obsession with power is not only about control over others, but about control over identity, about the ability to define who he is without being limited by his past. The mask allows him to create a new identity, one that reflects his current role, one that is not tied to the expectations of his earlier life. This transformation is not only external but internal, shaping how he thinks, how he acts, how he understands his place within the world. This focus on identity also influences how he views others, because he sees people in terms of their roles, their positions within the system, their usefulness within the structure he has created. Individuals become part of the larger network, defined by their function rather than their personal identity. And this perspective reinforces his control because it reduces complexity, making it easier to manage and direct. For Batman, this creates a different kind of challenge, because while many opponents operate outside of systems, Black Mask operates within one, using it to his advantage, creating layers that must be navigated, structures that must be understood. Stopping him is not only about confronting him directly, but about disrupting the system he relies on, about breaking the connections that support his power. Their encounters often reflect this difference, because Batman must move through networks, uncover hidden operations, identify key points within the system, and act in ways that reduce the overall structure rather than focusing on a single point. This requires a broader perspective, an understanding of how organized crime functions, how influence is maintained, how control is enforced. Within Arkham, Roman Sionis does not lose his sense of control entirely, because even in confinement, the mindset remains, the understanding of structure, the awareness of how systems operate. He may not have the same level of influence, but the principles that guide him do not disappear, and this creates a presence that continues to reflect his approach, even in a limited environment. In the larger context of Gotham, Black Mask represents the persistence of traditional crime, the idea that even in a city filled with chaos and unpredictability, there are still those who seek to maintain order within the underworld, to create systems that can function despite the instability around them. His presence shows that crime is not only about sudden action, but about long-term structure, about the ability to maintain control over time. The mask of control, in this sense, is both literal and symbolic, representing the way Roman Sionis shapes his identity, his environment, his influence, using structure and fear to maintain power. It reflects the belief that control can be achieved through careful planning, through the management of systems, through the shaping of perception. And within that belief, there is a clear contrast with the forces of chaos that exist in Gotham, creating a balance between structure and disruption, between control and unpredictability, between those who build systems and those who break them. Roman Sionis stands firmly on one side of this balance, maintaining his position through discipline, through control, through the constant effort to hold everything together. In the end, his story is not only about power, but about identity, about the role of control in shaping both the self and the world around it, about the way fear can be used to maintain order, about the tension between traditional structures and the chaos that challenges them. And as long as Gotham continues to exist in this balance, figures like Black Mask will remain, holding on to their systems, maintaining their control, standing against the forces that seek to disrupt everything they have built. The system itself, Arkham as a character. There is a way of looking at Arkham that goes beyond seeing it as a building, beyond its walls, its locked doors, and its guarded halls, because over time, as more stories pass through it, as more lives intersect within its space, it begins to feel less like a place and more like something that exists on its own, something that changes, adapts, and responds to what happens inside it, almost as if it is alive in a quiet, steady way that cannot be easily seen but can always be felt. The idea that Arkham is a system rather than just a location begins to take shape when one looks closely at how it functions, how it holds people, how it releases them, and how those same people often return again and again, creating a pattern that continues without a clear end. At first, Arkham is presented as a solution, a place designed to contain those who cannot be held within the normal structures of Gotham, a space where treatment and control come together, with the goal of restoring balance, of protecting the city from those who have disrupted it. The intention behind it is clear, because it is meant to provide both safety and understanding, to remove immediate threats while also addressing the deeper causes behind them. But as time passes and as more cases are brought within its walls, the results begin to show a different picture, one where the outcome does not always match the intention, one where the same individuals appear again and again, moving through the system in a cycle that feels almost fixed. This cycle becomes one of the most defining features of Arkham, because it shapes how the institution is understood, how it is experienced, how it fits within the larger structure of Gotham. The pattern is familiar: capture, confinement, a period of stillness, and then escape, followed by a return to the city, and eventually another capture. This sequence repeats, not exactly the same each time, but close enough that it begins to feel like a system of its own, a rhythm that continues regardless of individual events. Within this cycle, Arkham plays a central role, not only as the place where individuals are held, but as part of the process that allows the cycle to continue. The walls are strong, the security is present, the staff is trained, and yet the system does not hold completely because there are gaps, weaknesses, or perhaps deeper issues that prevent it from achieving its purpose in a lasting way. Each escape reveals something about these limits, something about how control can be challenged, something about how the system responds under pressure. Over time, these repeated events begin to raise questions, not only about the individuals who pass through Arkham, but about Arkham itself, about whether the system is fully effective, about whether it addresses the root of the problem, or simply manages its surface. The idea begins to form that Arkham may not only be responding to the issues within Gotham, but also contributing to them, not by intention, but by the way it functions. This perspective shifts how Arkham is seen, because instead of being a final point in the process, a place where problems are resolved, it becomes part of an ongoing loop, a space where issues are contained temporarily but not fully addressed, where the conditions that led to those issues remain unchanged. The individuals who enter Arkham are often shaped by the same environment they return to, and the system within Arkham does not always alter that connection in a lasting way. The idea of Arkham as a living system becomes more clear when looking at how it interacts with the people inside it, because it does not remain the same over time, but changes based on what happens within it. New patients bring new dynamics, new staff introduce new approaches, new events create new pressures, and the institution adjusts, responds, adapts in ways that reflect these changes. It is not static, but moving, not fixed, but evolving, shaped by the constant flow of activity. This movement gives Arkham a presence that feels almost independent, as if it has its own patterns, its own rhythms, its own way of continuing regardless of individual actions. The walls remain, but what happens within them shifts, creating an environment that is always changing, always responding, always part of the larger system of Gotham. For those within Arkham, this creates a unique experience because they are not only interacting with other individuals, but with the system itself, with the routines, the structures, the rules that guide daily life. These elements shape behavior, influence decisions, create conditions that affect how people think and act. The environment becomes part of the experience, not just a background, but an active element that contributes to what happens. For Batman, this perspective changes how Arkham is approached, because it is not enough to see it as a place where individuals are taken after being stopped, but as part of the larger system that must be understood. Each return to Arkham, each escape from it, each cycle that continues, becomes part of a pattern that he must consider, part of a process that influences how he acts, how he prepares, how he responds. The idea that the system may be part of the problem does not mean that Arkham is intentionally harmful, but that its structure may not fully address the complexity of what it is trying to manage. The individuals within it are not only acting based on their own conditions, but in response to the environment they are placed in. And if that environment does not provide a path to change, the cycle is likely to continue. This creates a deeper question about how systems function, about whether containment alone is enough, about whether understanding without change can lead to different outcomes, about how the environment shapes behavior over time. Arkham becomes a case study in this sense, a place where these questions can be observed, where patterns can be seen, where the interaction between individuals and systems becomes visible. At the same time, it is important to recognize that Arkham does provide moments of stability, moments where threats are reduced, where the city is given space to recover, where individuals are removed from situations where they could cause harm. These moments are real, and they are part of what the system is designed to achieve, but they are temporary, part of a larger cycle rather than a final solution. This balance between temporary control and ongoing repetition defines Arkham's role within Gotham, creating a space where progress is made but not completed, where change is attempted but not fully realized. It is a system that works in parts but not in whole, a structure that addresses immediate needs but struggles with long-term outcomes. In the end, Arkham stands as more than just a building, more than just a place of confinement, but as a reflection of the system it is part of, a system that is trying to manage complexity, to create order, to respond to challenges that do not have simple solutions. It is a living system in the sense that it moves, adapts, changes, influenced by everything that passes through it. And within that system, the cycle continues: capture, escape, return, not as a failure alone, but as a pattern that reveals something deeper, something about how problems are addressed, how systems function, how change occurs. Arkham does not end the story, but holds it, shapes it, allows it to continue, a central part of Gotham's ongoing narrative, a place where the struggle between order and chaos does not stop, but shifts, evolves, and carries on, always moving, always part of something larger, the endless night of Gotham. When the noise of Gotham begins to quiet, when the sirens fade into the distance, and the movement of the city slows just enough to be noticed, there is still something that remains, something steady beneath the surface, something that does not disappear even when the moment seems calm, and that is the ongoing pattern that connects everything, a cycle that moves through the city in ways that are not always seen, but are always present, shaping how events unfold, how stories continue, and how each figure within Gotham plays a part in something larger than themselves. Each of the figures who pass through Arkham, each of the individuals who rise and fall within Gotham, may seem separate at first, each with their own story, their own purpose, their own path. But when looked at more closely, connections begin to appear, patterns that link them together, not in a direct line, but in a network of interactions, influences, and responses that create a larger system. The Joker brings chaos that challenges structure. Two-Face reflects the breaking of balance, The Riddler introduces control through intellect. Scarecrow reveals fear as a guiding force. Bane tests strength and endurance, Mr. Freeze shows the pull of personal loss. Poison Ivy challenges human dominance. Harley Quinn reflects transformation and influence. Killer Croc represents isolation and survival. Hugo Strange studies the mind. Ra's al Ghul seeks balance through control. Azrael embodies structured justice. Black Mask enforces organized power. And Arkham itself holds them all within a system that continues to turn. These figures do not exist in isolation because their actions influence each other. Their presence creates responses. Their stories overlap, creating a cycle where one event leads to another, where one action shapes the conditions for the next. The chaos introduced by one may lead to the rise of another. The control enforced by one may be challenged by someone else. The fear created in one moment may influence decisions in the next. This creates a web of cause and effect that continues over time, a pattern that does not settle into a final form, but keeps moving, adjusting, evolving. At the center of this pattern is the balance between order and chaos, a balance that is never fully stable, never fully resolved, always shifting depending on the actions of those within the system. When order begins to take hold, when structure appears strong, when systems seem to function, chaos finds a way to challenge it, to reveal its weaknesses, to push against its limits. When chaos spreads, when unpredictability increases, when the city begins to lose control, forces of order rise in response, seeking to restore balance, to bring structure back into place. This movement between order and chaos is not a simple back and forth, but a continuous flow, a process that does not stop, that does not reach a final point, but continues as long as the city exists, as long as the conditions that create these forces remain. Gotham becomes a space where this balance is constantly tested, where stability is always temporary, where change is always possible. The bosses of Arkham, each in their own way, represent different points within this balance, different expressions of the same underlying tension, different responses to the conditions of the city. Some push toward chaos, others toward control. Some seek to understand, others to dominate. Some act out of personal need, others out of larger vision, but all are part of the same system, part of the same cycle, contributing to the ongoing movement. Batman stands within this system, not as a solution that ends the cycle, but as a force that responds to it, that works within it, that seeks to maintain balance, even as the system continues to shift. His presence does not remove chaos, but contains it, does not eliminate disorder, but reduces its impact, does not end the cycle, but influences how it unfolds. This places him within the same pattern, connected to the figures he faces, shaped by the same forces, part of the same ongoing story. Arkham itself becomes a central point within this cycle, a place where these figures are brought together, where their stories intersect, where the pattern becomes more visible. The cycle of capture, confinement, escape, and return reflects the larger movement of Gotham, a repetition that mirrors the balance between order and chaos, showing how neither side fully wins, how the system continues without a final resolution. This repetition does not mean that nothing changes, because each cycle carries differences, each return brings new conditions, each interaction adds to the overall pattern. The city evolves, the individuals change, the environment shifts, but the underlying structure remains. The balance continues to be tested. The movement does not stop. In quiet moments, when the city seems still, when the immediate tension is not visible, there is still a sense that the cycle is present, waiting, moving beneath the surface, shaping what will come next. The stories do not end, but pause, settle, prepare to continue. This creates a feeling that Gotham itself does not reach a final state, but exists in ongoing motion, a place where endings are not permanent, where conclusions lead to new beginnings. There is something reflective in this understanding, a recognition that not all systems are meant to reach a final balance, that some exist in a state of constant adjustment, where change is part of the structure rather than a disruption of it. Gotham becomes an example of this, a city that continues not because it has solved its problems, but because it has adapted to them, because it has found a way to exist within the cycle rather than outside of it. For those who observe this pattern, who follow the stories, who watch the movement between order and chaos, there is a sense that meaning is found not in the ending, but in the process, in the way events connect, in the way individuals influence each other, in the way the system continues to evolve. The endless night of Gotham is not only a setting, but a state, a reflection of a world where light and dark exist together, where balance is not fixed, but always shifting. And as the city settles once more, as the lights dim and the streets grow quiet, there is no final conclusion, no clear end to the story, only the continuation of what has already begun. The steady movement of a system that does not stop, that does not rest, that carries forward into the next moment, the next event, the next chapter that has yet to unfold. Gotham does not end because it cannot, because it is built on patterns that repeat, on forces that continue, on a balance that is never fully achieved. And within that endless night, the story goes on, quiet and constant, always present, always moving, always waiting for what comes next. And now, as our journey through the halls of Arkham slowly comes to rest, the echoes of every story begin to soften, fading gently into the quiet spaces between thought and memory, where the noise of conflict no longer feels sharp but distant, like something carried far away on a slow and steady breeze. The figures we followed, each shaped by their own path, their own struggle, their own place within Gotham's endless pattern, begin to settle, no longer moving, no longer pressing forward, but resting within the stillness of what has already been. The city itself grows calm, its restless rhythm slowing beneath the dim glow of distant lights, as if Gotham is finally taking a breath, releasing the weight it has carried for so long. The cycle continues, yes, but for now, it feels far away, quiet, and at peace. And as your mind begins to drift, you can let these stories fade, one by one, like shadows dissolving into the night, until there is nothing left to follow, nothing left to hold on to. Only the calm, the quiet, and the gentle stillness of rest.